Everybody get up, no need to cram now. We got a real jam going down, going down, going down, going down, going down, going down. Welcome to the IntelliJAMS.
Just jump into it. Adam, what do you want to jam on this week?
I was thinking we could jam on product interactions, and this was something that a customer and I were talking about, is like raising the price on some products. It affects some of the products in the test. It affects other products in the store. And let's talk about the interaction of different products when you're price testing.
Interesting. So when you say that, you mean like, hey, you have a catalog of different products of varying sizes. You start to do price testing on maybe it's the entire catalog, maybe it's a subset of the catalog, but regardless, changing the price on these products is going to have kind of residual effects into the rest of the catalog.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I guess as I think about it, there's a few different, maybe we can try and create categories on the fly, but there's like the effect when you run any price test, there's going to be the effect on the products that you're testing. And even within those, there might be different substitution effects as you change the prices within them. There's the effect on the products that you're not testing. And then there's also potentially positive feedback loops and negative feedback loops, both within and outside of that. So, yeah, I don't know if that's exactly the right classification, but I'm happy to start there.
Hey, I feel like it's a pretty good classification for being on the fly. So let's talk about kind of like let's call it like the test product, the other products, and then both like positive halo effects, negative halo effects that are going to happen from that.
Yeah, I mean, maybe and maybe it's easier to think about this with an example. So I don't know, I'm thinking about watches right now. And let's take an example of you have like wooden watches and aluminum watches, and maybe I'm price testing just the wooden watches. I want to say, hey, like, can I raise the price on my wooden watches in order to get higher margin? These things are super premium. I'm like chiseling and carving them out by hand. And so I think that like I can command 10% higher price for them. So what happens is, let's say you run a price test on those wooden watches and you try raising the price. You see that, inevitably conversion is going to go down. I guess like part of the reason to price test is the question is like, does conversion go down by a lot relative to the change in price or not so much? But say the conversion goes down. One thing that you may find is that like, you just sold fewer watches because you raised the price, you sold fewer watches. But it may be the fact actually that what happened is more people ended up just choosing the aluminum watches and not the wooden watches. And so you raised the price on the wood watches. You didn't touch the aluminum watches. You saw the conversion rate go down on those wooden watches naturally. But maybe it turns out that a bunch of people bought those aluminum watches. Now, that's an interesting dynamic. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? And I think let's start there. It's like the first dynamic. It's definitely happening. It could be happening. And so that's a classic example of substitution, where like the aluminum and the wood are like pretty substitutable. Maybe like I thought that I wanted wood, but then as I started thinking about the value and the price, maybe aluminum, in our example, maybe aluminum is our cheaper like product here. And the wood is the more like crafted one. And so, maybe people decided, well, I really like this brand and this kind of watch, and then ended up deciding to substitute the aluminum for the wood when the wood is at that higher price point. So that's definitely something to be aware of, and also a very common pattern that might happen.
It's really interesting because it's going to happen whether you raise or lower the price of the target product, right? So in our wood and aluminum example, I raise the price of the wood watch, then the aluminum might look more compelling as a substitute. I lower the price and like I get the inverse. And it's really interesting to me because like my marketing brain, like I'm a big brand guy, and I'm like, oh, sometimes people are more drawn to something if you raise the price. Like I remember I bought a can of coffee and was made with this like crazy bean, and it cost me $125 for a single can. And I bet you like the conversion on that. Trust me, I'm not actually that bougie, but that was fantastic coffee. Never going to buy it again though. But like having this kind of like premium product's really interesting because like it draws attention to it. And again, like, am I boosting the conversion by having a super high priced item? Maybe, but maybe that really high priced can is making the rest of my catalog look super compelling in comparison. My now $20 can of coffee is starting to look cheap in comparison to $100+ can.
And exactly, as you think about it, like, I think let's say in our example of you raise the price on the wooden watch, and I think that one of the questions to be asking yourself is, did you sell fewer watches overall? Or did you sell the same number of watches? And if you sell the same number of watches, maybe that's okay. Again, like on the converse, even if you sold the same number of watches, as you raise the price, if a lot of people started to substitute the aluminum for the wood and the aluminum is much cheaper, that actually might have downward pressure on your AOV. So now, like, again, imagine the wood was a $500 watch and the aluminum was a $250 watch. As you shift the mix towards a $250 watch, that actually might put downward pressure on AOV. So even though you've raised price, you might even see AOVs go down, which is counterintuitive. I just raised price. How come I'm seeing my AOVs go down with a higher price? Well, it's actually because people are buying a cheaper product. So that's like sort of an unintended side effect. And then on top of that, you may even see yet another impact, which is, even though the aluminum watch is $250, it might have great margins, right? So maybe even though the $500 watch is wooden and it's more expensive, it may be the fact that the aluminum watch at $250 is just way higher margins because you don't need to spend all that time chiseling it and whittling it and making it, perfect. And so it may be the case that, yeah, like your AOVs went down, but your margins went up, and like that was through the price raise. So anyway, there's a lot of like interesting second order effects that can happen here with this substitution.
And this is all really important because it's something that at least I've been talking about a lot lately is like, hey, you make a change and you have a targeted metric that you're probably looking to impact with that change, but it's going to impact everything. It might be that something stayed the same, but like you were saying, hey, like it impacted AOV, had an impact on conversion, had an impact on like volume. Like there's all these things at play, and it's important to look at it holistically because like that one change, if I don't look at all those things and I just want to take a look at conversion, I'm going to make a very different call on the results of that test if I'm just looking at an isolated metric than if I'm looking at it holistically.
And I think let's take a different direction here because I think there's like a totally different type of like product mix thing if we have time.
Yeah, go for it. Let's do that.
You think people are interested? If we've got you hooked, I guess you can't stop now. It's sort of the handle and the blades concept of like if you're selling, a razor handle, razor blades, and like you may be willing to lose money on the handle because the blades are the moneymaker. So like actually the goal is not necessarily to maximize the sale or the profit on that first sale, but it's on sort of the recurring. So this is very common in any kind of a subscription business, but any business that has sort of high LTV or also high add-on products. So where basically what you'll see is actually lowering the price of a product, you'll increase volume at lower margins. It may not even be profitable at that point, but because of the interaction effects with other products, okay, I'm going to now have to buy more blades. Or this is the very common example in grocery is like loss leaders with eggs and milk. I'm going to price cheaply eggs and milk to get people in the store, and then they're going to buy high margin products like Twix and I don't know what else.
All the other
beer.
Things that are at the checkout counter that
the
have
checkout stuff in the
margins.
beer aisle. Those are the high margin things. Yeah. So as you think about, people are coming into your store for something. And so a lot of times what we'll see is on that hero product, actually lowering the price of that hero product to just sell more of it and then making up some of that margin because then people add on other products is another pretty like common dynamic that we might see.
Interesting. So if we go back to like your original, when we started to jam on this, you said like, hey, you had like a customer interaction on this, like without naming the customer, I don't want to like put them out there, but like, what did they see? Like they saw something happen in this like product mix and like, what were they seeing?
Yeah. And what they saw was something even like maybe one of the different dynamics that we were talking about at the top, which is they A/B tested the whole collection of products. So going back to our watch and aluminum example, they tested both the wood watch and the aluminum watch at a higher price point. Obviously, again, conversion fell slightly, but the overall revenue and profit increased at that higher price point. They had the pricing power to do that. But one thing that was interesting is again, goes back to the AOV point. The AOV didn't increase as much as they expected the AOV to because of the price increase. And it was because at that higher price point, people were shifting from the more expensive product to the cheaper product. So they sold overall fewer products, but the conversion loss was not enough to offset the revenue and margin gain. So overall, it was a good move. But what was interesting and what they couldn't like wrap their head around at first was, I increased all the prices by 10%. Why did AOVs only go up 6%? Like, what's that gap there? And it's, well, because, as you increase the prices, there were people that just started to substitute for slight trade down to the cheaper product, which in their case wasn't necessarily a bad thing. That cheaper product had great margins for them. In fact, better margins than the more expensive in the case of our wooden and aluminum watch. And so, but at the same time, there might be some other consideration, which is like, hey, does that cheaper product create as much brand equity for me? And again, there's so many intangibles here. There's the measurable, there's the intangible stuff. As a marketer, I'm sure like that kind of like, I don't know how you feel about people buying the aluminum watch instead of the etched wooden one.
It really comes down to, like, again, there's so many variables here. And like, I think marketing always kind of gets grouped into there's an art and there's a science. And like here at IntelliJAMS, like we tend to nerd out on the science of it. But obviously there's like the art of this as well, is like, hey, this product's more likely to be shared on social. This product's more flashy. Someone's going to be more likely to ask about, like, again, so many intangibles. And like, I think the key takeaway here is you are not going to be able to measure all of those effects. But hey, with something like IntelliJAMS, you're going to be able to measure enough of them where you're going to be able to get a good sample of what's going on. And like, we're not going to sit here and pretend that like we're going to be able to tell you everything that's going to happen to your business from a change. But hopefully we're giving you enough of a view of the field to make a very informed decision about that change. And again, there could be other things like, strategically, my boss wants me to be moving more of this product, or my investors want me to be doing this. Like, there's all sorts of strategic stuff that can play into this as well.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's an excellent summary.